Genesis chapter 2, then, Adam, as the man, is given an assignment. It's an assignment that's different than Eve as the woman. He's given a role to play. And in Genesis chapter 2, God says, look, this is the way I want things to work, and he makes Adam responsible. He says, Adam, you're responsible for my creation. You're responsible for the garden that you live in. So God creates it and says, now, Adam, I'm making you responsible for it. Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. Then the Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend and keep it. My friend Brant Hansen has written a book I'd recommend to you men. It's called The Men We Need. And men, if you're not much on reading, then listen to the audio version. But he points to this passage in Genesis, and he explains that Adam, as the man, is given a title, and the title is Keeper of the Garden. Keeper of the Garden. And the word in Hebrew here for keeper is shamar, and it could be translated a number of different ways. It's a watcher of the garden, protector of the garden, cultivator of the garden. Adam, as a man, you have a responsibility. You're the keeper, protector, you're the watcher, you're the cultivator of the garden. This is the way that God wants things to work. That man would be responsible for the garden God has entrusted him with. A gardener is a protector. Protects from the weeds that might grow up and choke out the plants and the trees. A gardener protects from the predators that might come in and trample the plants or eat the leaves. And this is God's plan for men, specifically fathers, to be protectors. I think most men instinctively have that within them, but we as men can often settle for some pseudo version of it, some fake version of it. There's something about like playing a war video game or watching an action movie where we can be laying on the couch, we're not really doing anything, but it somehow satisfies in this cheap way what we were actually created for, to be a protector. And when a man is the opposite of protector, it becomes all kinds of toxic. It just becomes really damaging when the protector becomes the predator. Oh, so much damage. When the protector is just passive, so much dysfunction. We have been made to be protectors, keepers of the garden. I remember a number of years ago getting an especially hateful email from someone I didn't know, and it was hateful enough that it didn't bother me too much. Like sometimes if it's over the top, it's a little bit like, oh, that's a you problem, right? And so the guy sent it to me, but yet I knew from experience that it's not good to just internalize these things. You need to share it with other people. And so I forwarded it to my dad so that he could read it, help me keep perspective. He'd been in leadership all of his life. I thought, oh, he'll understand this. And so I forwarded it to him. And then 10 minutes later, I get a message from him, from my dad. Actually, he was forwarding me, my dad was forwarding me the email that he had already sent to the other guy in response. I'm like, oh, that's not what I was going for. Like, it was a little embarrassing. I didn't really want my dad showing up at the playground, and but he wrote this at the top of the message that he forwarded to me. It just said, sorry, son, I couldn't help myself. I get that as a dad. Like, I know I shouldn't, but it's just this instinct within me that wants to protect. And I think as men, we hear protector, and there's part of us that immediately resonates with it, but we tend to think more in terms of like Braveheart protector. Like, give me a sword, let me fight for the people I love, been entrusted with. But understand that protector these days may mean coming home from work and checking your teenager's social media, even though it drives them nuts, and frankly, it's kind of a pain for you to do. But you need to know what's happening in their lives. You need to know what's happening in the garden. Protector these days may mean refusing to let your middle schooler have Snapchat, TikTok, even though all the other middle schoolers seem to have them. And the middle schoolers who are sitting here right now are so frustrated with me. Like, oh, really? I come to church on Father's Day and this is... Protector these days may mean keeping a filter on the devices of the home, even though it's inconvenient. Protector these days may mean working an extra job to pay the bills because you're protecting your family from poverty, from hunger, from uncertainty. Protection may mean preparing and discipling. It most certainly means preparing and discipling your child so your child can be ready to face the threats and dangers when you're not around. It means discipling them now so they can resist the cultural indoctrination that they're going to have to deal with later. Protection means guarding your own hearts and your own eyes so that you can lead from a place of purity. Protection means having a direct conversation with the boy that your daughter has been dating. It can mean that. When my middle daughter, Morgan, started dating the man that she's now married to, she knew that he would need to have a conversation with me. And so he knew that too. And so one day he came in. I love these conversations. They're full of awkward silence that I've come to enjoy. And so one day he comes into the house, and instead of saying, hey, can I talk to you? He says to my wife and I, he says to Desiree and I, he says, can I talk to both of you? And I'm like, oh. Usually, in my mind, I'm like, usually that's just man-to-man conversation, but that's fine. It's all good. And so he sits down with me and my wife, and I launch into my talk. Hey, buddy, let me remind you that when you're dating my daughter, you're not just dating my daughter, but you're also, let's be honest, likely dating someone else's wife, because there's very little chance that she's gonna marry you. And that's a pretty good line. You can use it if you want to. So I deliver that line, and my wife interrupts and says, Kyle, that's so mean. Why would you say that? And turns to him and says, I'm so sorry, that wasn't very nice. I'm like, oh, you are ruining this moment for me. And sometimes protection means that you're not always nice. You can still be kind. And she was right. They did get married, and I do love them. But protection can look different these days. A gardener is also called to be the keeper or the cultivator, consistently caring for the plants, making sure that they receive water and nutrients as needed. I Googled the question because I certainly didn't know the answer intuitively. I Googled the question, what makes a great gardener? And the number one answer was patience. I thought that was helpful. Patience. That, okay, today I'm going to plant and I'm going to water, even though I know I won't see a harvest maybe for a long time into the future. Galatians 6:9 puts it this way, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the right time or at the proper time, we will reap a harvest if we don't give up. And maybe that's a word that some of you fathers need to hear today. Don't give up. Just day in and day out, keep cultivating, keep nurturing. It's Justin reading Bible stories to his son before his son can even speak. It's Eric singing worship songs in the car with his kids while running carpool. It's Jay kneeling down beside his son's bed every night to pray over him. It's Ronnie recording prayers and texting them to his teenage daughter. It's John taking a week off work to go on a mission trip with his girl. It's Chris turning down a promotion at work, even though it means not making as much money, so he won't have to travel and he can help coach his son's baseball team. It's Matt, a former college football player who sees a fatherless boy who lives down the road in the neighborhood and grabs a football and asks the boy if he wants to play catch in the front yard. I just want to challenge the men to just continue being cultivators, just doing the daily work. I want to challenge every dad in here to read through a 5-day Bible reading plan that we've put together. My dad worked with some of our staff and put this together. If you go to the YouVersion Bible app, or you can scan the QR code, it just will take you fathers on this 5-day Bible reading plan. I would love to encourage you to do. My challenge for you as fathers is to pray every day for your kids, every single day. One image of a father would be that of a priest. And in scripture, a priest was someone who talks to God about the people and talks to people about God. So in the family context, a priest is someone who talks to his family, talks to his kids about God, and talks to God about his kids. Be that role as a keeper of the garden. I want to challenge you, husbands, or for you men who one day hope to be husbands, to come every weekend, the next 4 weekends, as we go through this marriage series. But work at it. A good gardener puts in the work. Adam's role was to be the keeper, the protector of the garden. But in chapter 3, we read that there's a snake in the garden, and Satan comes to tempt Eve to disobey God. And God had given them only one command: don't eat of this tree, one tree. Verse 6 says, when the woman saw that the fruit of that tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it, and she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. So Eve takes a bite of this fruit, and it would seem that at that point sin enters the world, but that's not what the Bible teaches. Romans 5:12 says, sin entered the world through one man. It doesn't say through one woman. Why? Even though Eve took the first bite, Adam was the one responsible for the garden. Adam was the one who should have seen the snake. Adam was the one who should have warned of danger. Adam was the one who should have said something or done something. He's the one who's held responsible. Genesis chapter 3, verse 6, look at it again. She also gave some to her husband who was on his phone. Like that's how I read this. He was with her, but he's disengaged. He was with her, but he's not paying attention, doesn't seem to be aware of some of the threats that are taking place around him. But he's just there. He's not doing anything, but that's the problem. He's not doing anything, which is the opposite of what has been given as a responsibility to the keeper of the garden. And I know there can be a fair amount of discouragement these days, and maybe you look around and you think, okay, well, where are the men like this? Where are all the men? The men who have the courage to fight for the hearts of their wives and children, the protectors, the watchers, the keepers of the garden. And I know that some of you are in environments where you don't get to see men like this, and maybe some of you have grown up in places where you saw the opposite of men like this, and your heart's just kind of hard to the whole idea of it. But I'll just tell you, I spend time around a lot of these kinds of men. They're not perfect, they are broken like me, but they are passionate, and they are intentional, and they are purposeful, and they are accountable. And when they fall down, they get back up, and they're gonna fight for the hearts of their wives and their kids. Men like Brian and Greg and Mark and Michael and Murphy and Heath and James and Justin and Bryson and Matt and Eddie and Neil and Lucas and Carl, and like Harrison and Carrie and Brad and Corey and Patrick and Taylor and Byron and Chris and Tim and Steve and Jason and Brad and Doug and John and Tony and Ronnie and Brian and Eric and Render and Sam and Thomas and Matt and Brent, like Trevor and Vince and Jeff and Kyle and Will and Wes, and the list just goes on. Not perfect men, but men who I know would give their lives for this. And I want to challenge our men. I want to speak courage into the hearts of our men. Embrace your role as keeper of the garden.